Hello, welcome to Acquisition for Decision Advantage, the role of the CDAO in scaling software solutions. I am Cynthia Cook, Director of the Defense Industrial Initiatives Group here at CSIS and a Senior Fellow with the International Security Program. And I am joined today by the Deputy Chief Digital and Artificial Intelligence Officer, or CDAO, for the Department of Defense, Margie Palmieri. The CDAO is a new office in the Department of Defense, launched in February of 2022. The CDAO comprises 4 previously separate programs: the Joint Artificial Intelligence Center, or JAIC, the Chief Data Officer, the Defense Digital Services, and the data platform Advana. One of the primary missions of the CDAO is to improve decision-making in the field for the warfighter through better data and machine learning tools, and we're going to take an acquisition focus on those topics today. But first, let me introduce our brilliant speaker. Before her role as Deputy CDAO, Ms. Palmieri was the Director of Integrated Fires for the Deputy Chief of Naval Operations for Information Dominance, where she was tasked with overseeing investments, policy objectives, and training in such roles as electronic warfare, cyber, and targeting. Prior to that, she was the director of the Chairman's Action Group, a group of experts that advise the chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff. Ms. Palmieri received her master's degree in public policy and her bachelor's degree in political science from Rutgers University in the great state of New Jersey. Welcome.
Thank you.
Margie, one of the roles of the CDAO is to review and more tightly integrate the Department of Defense's policy, strategy, and governance of data, analytics, AI, to include an integrated data, analytics, and AI strategy, as well as maturing a responsible AI ecosystem. And this comes from your website, by the way. So this is a significant challenge, and I don't want to constrain your thoughts on this, but I'm wondering if you could reflect on this role, specifically with the idea of informing industry partners and what it means for defense acquisition.
Yeah, sure. Well, thanks for having me and for taking a look at this really important area of acquisition. We can come up with all the ideas in the world that we like, but without actually being able to put capability in the field, and we do that through our acquisition process, contracts, and funding, and all the pieces that make that real. And so I think that goes to your point, or to your question. The CDAO has a couple of responsibilities. We have the ability to set strategy for the department, and we're working on a revised data analytics and AI adoption strategy right now. Hopefully by the end of the summer we'll see that out. And we have policy authority over data. So the Chief Data Officer's role came to CDAO, and that allows us to really look at how the department uses data and structures its data, tags its data, and makes it available and accessible, and all the other qualities around data that we need to put in place in order to be able to get to the analytics and AI layer. But we also have this incredible technical talent on our teams from those organizations that you mentioned, and they are really thinking through what it means to create products in this space. Mm-hmm. I'll use the word products very specifically. It's a word that DoD is not perhaps used to. We like the word program a lot more. Mm-hmm. And in fact, our acquisition process is set up around programs. This is, you have a requirement, you build something, you deliver something, there's a funding stream associated with it, there's a bunch of abilities associated with it. But products are really focused on what users need, and how do we make sure that what we're building is responsive to the user itself, himself, herself. And then what's the process by which we really understand the problem that we're trying to solve, or mm-hmm. that the user has, and then bring that into fruition. And that process is a lot more, I think, agile and iterative than we're used to in the traditional, I'm going to use definitely hardware process. Yeah. And so in CDAO, as we think about not only the policy and the data aspects, we're also thinking through how do we produce products in the data analytic and AI space, mm-hmm. and then what are the implications as it relates to how we acquire those.
So really starting with capabilities that are needed and coming up with the policies to support AI or data-enabled capabilities?
Yeah, one of the things we inherited from the JAIC, the Joint AI Center, was acquisition authority. Now it's capped to a certain funding amount, and there's no way we can do all of the work that we need through our own office, and we partner actually really well right now with a bunch of different offices throughout government to do that acquisition. But being able to think through the acquisition approach and really look at all the flexibilities that we've been given by Congress as a department and how to combine those in new and unique ways. We have that lever of change as well to say, hey, in order to go after this, we don't have to just provide guidance on it. We can actually test it out and see if it's worthwhile before we say whether or not it's a best practice.
Well, so on the one hand, you have this authority to set policy, but you really can't control what the services do. So can you talk a little bit about that? Like, how do you inspire and sell the services to incorporate best practices in their programs and in how they work with industry?
Yeah, the first step is we listen. So we are really grounded inside of CDAO around how the department works. We have this really incredible workforce that is both from industry, so they understand best practices on how to actually deliver software and data and analytic capability, and people from government. We actually had an offsite yesterday, and we had everyone in the room stand up based off of how many years of experience they had, 5, 10, 15. We had a couple people with over 20 years of experience and a significant number with 10 to 20. Now, most people would say, oh, that's going to result in a not backwards, but like kind of follower mindset, or maybe not a rapid, mindset. I really look at those people, and when you look at who they are as individuals and the group that we've assembled, they're bureaucracy hackers, and they know how the process works, and they know what not to do and where there's opportunity to make a difference. And that doesn't mean they have to work around the system. In CDAO, we're very focused on where are the barriers systemically, and then how do we go after them and make sure that others can do it with us. And so that's one of the things we think about with the services. We know DoD is decentralized, distributed, and very, very large. And we don't start off with this idea that we're going to do something centrally in CDAO and kind of mandate it across the department. We sit down and we listen to, hey, what problem are you trying to solve? What barriers are you running into? How can we help? Is there an enterprise capability we can provide? Is there someone we can connect you with that has done this before, that can do it more innovatively? And then we share best practices around what we've found and then listen to where they want to go.
Well, what are the biggest challenges that the services have with these areas, and both in their own internal management and also as they write requirements and work with industry?
Yeah, I will not speak to the services. The last time I was in a program, was several years ago. So I'm going to say at least 4 years ago, when I was doing requirements and resourcing for the Navy's programs. But what we hear a lot of is what you'd expect. Do we have access to cloud? With the CIO's new joint warfighting cloud concept, that's much more accessible now, and I think the services are looking at how to leverage that. We no longer have to do kind of pocket things or work with the IC, so that opens up the aperture. But getting infrastructure both at the cloud and at the edge is really important. Figuring out really how we're going to manage our data. I think across the board, because of that program mindset where we deliver a system and we train the users on the system and then we sustain the system, we don't really think about it as delivering a data capability. That it doesn't even just have to be a sensor, because a lot of times we think of data as just the sensor, but any capability that starts to make greater insights out of our data, whether it provides it raw like a sensor does, or whether it starts to combine information together or put analytics on top of it, is a data producer, and we have to think about data as a product inside of DoD, and that's a different kind of construct than how we normally provision capability. And then there's the access to analytics and AI at scale, and I think you see across the services a lot of activities and things that they're doing to learn what makes the most sense for their use cases.
Well, there's so many layers of data within the Department of Defense, and it's terrific to see that this is being understood as the source of advantage.
Yes.
When I, just having worked in acquisition for 25 years, I've seen the huge amount of data that acquisition programs develop over time, and just the challenges in collecting and sharing data on what the department does internally. In terms of working in terms of working within the department with resource sponsors, there's interest in data, there's interest in keeping data to themselves. And then in terms of operations, there's huge amounts of data, and industry also generates data. So how do you understand this big picture challenge, and where is the role of CDAO in this? Are you the big owner of all of this, or are you trying to chunk out and say, this is yours, this is ours?
Yeah, the Deputy Secretary of Defense came out with some data decrees a few years ago around the fact that nobody really owns their data. So we don't like to talk about data ownership, because it really is the department's data, and in some cases the taxpayers' data, to the extent that we can share the classified pieces obviously are not going to be found widely, but we want to think of data as a like I said before, a product, right? It has multiple users and consumers, and in a lot of cases, I think we were talking earlier today, the thing about a bureaucracy is it specializes, and we need it to specialize, because we want people to be really good at the things that they're good at. But that can also create obviously silos, right? Where data as a product means that your customer may not come from your direct community. And so let's say, I'll use a tactical example. If you're a radar on an Aegis ship, you're focused on feeding a combat system on that Aegis ship for self-protection and offensive fires. But that track that you pick up may be useful to an aircraft, or back to the command and control center, or some other, maybe for patterns of life by an intel analyst. And so your products are actually coming, your customers are coming from much further beyond your existing community. And we haven't really designed our processes inside of DoD to think about how to manage data as a product. And so for CDAO, our focus right now is on how do we go to this data mesh kind of concept, where data as a product stays closest to the owner the user or the producer as possible. And because they're the expert. And then how do you link them up with other customers throughout the department, and make sure that they're curating that data for other uses. So we've got that broader strategy piece, and then we allow the specialization to happen across the department.
So what are a couple of the big picture takeaways in terms of the broader strategy, looking forward, in terms of the vision for data and analytics across the department?
Yeah, data quality is number one for us. We can't get to analytics and AI without addressing data quality. These are the VALTIS acronyms: visible, accessible, understandable, linked, integrated, trustworthy, and secure. I think I got all of them. And so, all those aspects of data quality have to come source by source, or really decision by decision, because we have over 4,000 sources of data just on our business side alone. So that's number one. That's a big anchor part. Another one is about this concept of being iterative and focused on learning in this space. This isn't like a traditional hardware system where you can deploy it and sustain it in the traditional sense, where you kind of provide upgrades every few years. With AI, even more than software, where software you think of continuous updates and iteration, AI is even more so. I mean, we want the user inside of the system that has artificial intelligence to be constantly correcting and guiding the system in terms of feedback. So this idea that we're much more iterative is another key anchor point.
So that's an internal management question. How do you connect that with the department's goals of enhancing readiness, operational efficiency? So the use cases for all this data and AI. Can you reflect a little bit on that?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things we did inside of CDAO is provide data teams to each one of the principal staff assistants. So this is at OSD, program or personnel and readiness, the CIO, acquisition and sustainment, policy. So each one of those offices. And each one of those offices are also in charge of the implementation of the National Defense Strategy and the Strategic Management Plan. So there are goals, objectives, metrics, and then data sources associated with how are we going to track our progress there. So we provided the data teams, and through the Advana platform have connected data sources so that the offices can now start to build analytics and dashboards and better understand where we are in tracking our strategy. Underneath that are the actual goals. And so in each of those teams, as well as at the combatant commands, the data teams, because we provided data teams to the combatant commands as well as part of our ADA initiative, named after Ada Lovelace, but also happens to stand for AI and Data Acceleration. So teams of the COCOMs, it is amazing to go out and visit these teams at the COCOMs and see what they are doing to actually take the data that are supporting operational command decisions and put analysis behind it and show that of all the orders that a combatant command has received, how do they understand what their tasks are and how do they deconflict and put that in a visual or analytic space. Or thinking through all the finances at a combatant command and what that looks like. Or to your point about readiness, what is the status of forces and how do they project that over time and understand how to link that back with the service databases. And we have at least, the team told me the other day we're turning down 500,000 use cases a year, but then we're taking on others. The biggest shift for us is now how do we enable those inside of the organizations to do this themselves more at scale.
Thanks. That's very informative, and I think the discussion of military, operational efficiency is a great seg into a suite of programs that is a subject of great interest, both from the future capability it might offer, but also from the industry perspective on where they can plug in, and that is the Joint All-Domain Command and Control, or JADC2 program. Yeah. The goal of JADC2, for those who are new to it, is to allow warfighters to sense, make sense of, and act on information across the battle space. I've heard it described more simply as connecting sensors to shooters. As we move forward and get increasing capability from a variety of sensors, from data connectivity and sources, it is a great opportunity to push ahead the overall capabilities of the Department of Defense. We know that each service has a JADC2 program with the Navy's Project Overmatch, the Army's Project Convergence, and the Air Force's Advanced Battle Management System. So given that they all operate as a joint force, there's clearly a role for an integrating capability, a coordinating office to ensure that they can talk to each other, that they have data standards, and so forth. So can you talk about the CDAO's role in JADC2?
Yeah.
And you can use as many acronyms as you like in your answer.
Fantastic. So this, let me first start with, command and control in the military has been evolving over time forever and ever and ever. Joint All-Domain Command and Control is no different. In response to the joint warfighting concept, which the Joint Staff released, they've released now 3 iterations of, we need a different way to command and control in order to support that concept. And so Joint All-Domain Command and Control is really a verb in a lot of cases. It's not this single thing we're going to go buy that's going to suddenly solve all of our challenges. But as you said, each of the services are working through different aspects of JADC2 and what is necessary to bring together all domains. So that's kind of number one, air, surface, undersea, cyber, space, ground, thinking through how all those domains operate together. And then the joint force, which is how do you connect the different services to each other in support of the Joint Task Force Commander or the combatant commander's objectives. Inside of CDAO, we've really focused on that data piece, as you might be surprised about. The interoperability of data, the exchange of data, and as the services work on, especially those sensor-to-shooter kill chains, how do we also think about the sensor-to-decision-maker aspects of that? Because C2 is all about people making decisions. And in warfare, we're going to have humans making decisions well into eternity. And so when we think about the data integration layer, there's a couple things, and I'll outline it broadly, and then we can jump in if you want to. Okay. But in a lot of cases right now, the way decision-making is approached is there is a decision maker, and they have a set of decisions that they have to make in their role, whether that's at the combatant command level, operational, or tactical. And there's a development group that gets together, and they said, what decisions do they have to make? Okay, this is the data that we need. These are applications that we're going to build. And they build that basically kind of application platform for them to make that decision. Mm-hmm. And that works really great for that decision maker. But that decision maker doesn't control all the decisions. And so there's another decision maker and another one, another mission application and another mission application. And then after a while, everyone says, well, I have really good SA here, but I can't necessarily share it with anyone else. And so for data integration, it's as much about the data that we can take out of those applications as it is about the data that we can put into those applications. So we're thinking through, first of all, we found that most decision makers are going after similar data sets, as you can imagine. Mm-hmm. They're using it for different purposes, and the applications that they're building are for different purposes, but the data sets are the same. So we're trying to think through how can we democratize data access so that we can have, especially industry, develop on top of government data to support a wide variety of users for their specific applications, because that's what scale is going to look like when we're actually mm-hmm. able to match users up to developers and government data is ready and available for that kind of development. Right now it's, do you have an ATO? Have you gone through the security process? If you have, okay, you get one data source. Now on to the next one and the next one. And these are things that we do to ourselves in government, right? Yeah. These kind of processes. The next question is, okay, now that you've enriched that source data with some sort of insight based off your analytic, how can you share that back out as a product to the rest of the enterprise? They might not need all the pieces, but that's up for their application to decide. And so it's as much about data out as it is about data in. And we think that allows industry to come with the diversity and the intellect and creativity around the application layer, and for users to get very specific with what they need. And that partnership can continue even while we facilitate the sharing of data across different users and platforms. Mm-hmm. And that exists at the C2 level down to the tactical level.
Thank you. As you talked, I was reflecting on the fact that there's this diversity of data and a diversity of systems, and each service does have its own approach to its JADC2 program, and what services do extraordinarily well is work with industry on technical solutions. I mean, there's challenges, but you can write a requirement, issue a contract, and work with the result. I mean, we can noodle about whether it's sufficiently iterative or agile or whatever, but you can get results. The question that is a bit more challenging when you're trying to connect capabilities that are going to have to work together, it becomes less a technical challenge and more of a sociological challenge. Yeah. So how do you think about the ecosystem of getting these different capabilities to work together within the Department of Defense and with allies and partners? So can you talk about that from a government perspective? And I'd also appreciate if you had any insights that you can share with regard to how industry who will be producing these capabilities should understand this and think about it. Yeah. That's a lot of different questions all at once.
You're absolutely right. Both on the solutions we develop being sociologically based and on the behavior necessary to deliver the systems. And we tackle both of those through experimentation. So the Global Information Dominance Experiment, or GUIDE series, was something Northcom created to really test data and analytics in support of decision making. Mm-hmm. They ran about 4 different GUIDE experiments, about one every 90 days, so very quick and iterative, with industry bringing new capability at each increment to see if it helped with their workflows. And so we've picked up that exercise or experiment inside of CDAO, starting with GUIDE 5, which we did at the beginning of February of this year, and GUIDE 6, which is just in its last week or two of experiment right now. And we test 2 things in that experiment. One is the integration across combatant commanders. So we know that in a fight, we're going to have resources that have to be prioritized across different use cases, whether it's defending the homeland while projecting power, or whether it's deterrence. All those different pieces and decisions have to happen across combatant commands with the Joint Staff and the Secretary of Defense. And also, how we go from intelligence to courses of action to ability to source on the logistics side those courses of action, and then rinse, wash, repeat as the battle changes. And then we look at also from the combatant command down to the tactical level. How did that decision for force allocation or force positioning or weapon target pairing make its way all the way down to the action level and the shooter? And each guide that we do manufactures a crisis. It's based off of operational scenarios, but it manufactures a sociological crisis, which says we have to connect this because operators are going to be playing in this experiment in 90 days, and we want to see the impact. And we want you, whether it's on the government side, on the industry side, or on the policy side, to come and see if you can't solve it for this guide, because the next one's not for another 90 days, and all of our senior decision makers are watching what we're learning and how we're solving this problem. So in this last guide that's running right now, we ran it for June and July for the 8 weeks of these 2 months. We were able to make 70% of the data connections and capabilities we brought are going to continue to be operational in the future. And so once you make that data connection into an existing software system, you've made that software system much better, and you don't have to do that again or operationalize that. That's now available. So your question was about the services. We're just starting to work with the services to now bring them in either into the guide series or work with them in their own experimentation series to say, how can we start to take this mindset of data integration and the data integration layer and work it into what you're already doing at the service level, but connect you up to the joint force and have this data in and data out capability available to you, because everyone wants the data.
Yeah.
So we really see experimentation as the way to drive that.
Are they willing to share the data?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, who is they?
I don't want to point to any fingers, but let me reframe and rephrase. I mean, I see experimentation as the solution, so I'm delighted that you're just describing that. But that takes time, that takes energy, that takes resources. It involves ensuring that the services and the other participants trust the process, that they can share their challenges without being chastised, that they can enjoy their successes and watch them be shared with others. So how do you create that environment where the experimentation yields what you would like it to yield?
Yeah, we are very metrics based in terms of both the operational workflows and how fast they go, or the quality of decisions or the quality of data we're getting out of them, or on the technical side, how are we connecting things and what barriers are we running into. We have incredible support from the department at the most senior levels, from DepSecDef and SecDef, to use guide as a true learning opportunity. We don't white card, we want to fail, and we want to identify what that barrier looks like. And then we have our partners on the CIO side with Mr. Sherman, and on the combatant command side with each of the commanders, looking and on the policy side for some of the policy barriers, really eager to work through what we have to as a department to remove those barriers, that we can do that again and again. So there is no stigma of failure. In fact, we did the first guide in February, and then we had a DMAG in April. This is where the Deputy Secretary brings together all the service unders and the OSD principals, and we were the first people to stand up at the DMAG and say, this is what we failed at, and this is what we have to do better at going forward, because it's such an important part. It's not a training exercise, and so there's no scorecard on right or wrong. And in some cases in the experiment, we're pitting two different solutions to the same problem against each other to see how they perform. And so trying to create that kind of environment. And when we sit down, we're really solving the operational problems, focused on the Indo-Pacific, and so everyone feels that sense of urgency inside of the department to go after those.
So what I'm hearing is really a culture and leadership issue to create the environment where, with a focus on the potential threat, you're pushing people to. Yeah. Can you talk not just within the DoD, but the United States never fights alone. We have allies and partners across the world. One of the challenges we've heard about in our own research on JADC2 is that allies and partners don't always know where they're going to plug in. They don't know what data they're going to get. They don't know the trigger points for data sharing. They don't necessarily see if they have systems for data sharing at different levels of classification. How are you seeing that problem, and what are the steps are you taking to move the department along?
Yeah, no, absolutely. The ally and partner information sharing is critical, and we've seen that, especially in Ukraine. So inside of Guide 6, we were just at a Five Eyes DV Day this week, where we had representatives from each of the Five Eyes partners there. The UK played in Guide 6 from the UK, which was really exciting because they were able to work in operation in collaboration with US partners and actually Canadian partners. And then we had an Australian LNO play as well, really to understand what the barriers are. Each of the combatant commands has also taken on the partner information sharing question. The department has a broader mission partner environment effort that they're looking at how to accelerate and focus. So there are solutions out there. What we're trying to do is understand how can we bring them together from a data perspective. A lot of this gets into like geeky ontology kind of things, right? Where you want to make sure that a tank is a tank, fuel tank, armor tank, and other ways to make sure that when we say this object is an object and it has the following properties, our allies and partners can contribute and see those pieces as well. One of the biggest challenges for us has been, our own data and how we tag our own data for them to be able to see and for us to share. And so our policy shop out of Guide 6 got a great task to go chase down, like, why do we classify these data types as no foreign, and who's the original classification authority? And so we're just going to pull the string. We've got folks that really love that kind of work, and we're gonna tackle that.
So that's a part of the bigger ecosystem that you're working with.
And then Guide 7, which will happen this September, is partnered with BoldQuest, which is a exercise run by the Joint Staff where they bring in different allies and partners at a more tactical level. So we're trying to connect with the different exercises out there. We do a globally integrated war game with allies and partners. So really, and then the combatant commands have different exercises, that they do with allies and partners. And so we're trying to take these points that already exist and get the lessons from them. What we're finding is the barriers are often really common, but they just exist in the exercise, and it's produced as a lesson, and somebody needs to pick it up and run with it. So we're gonna do that.
So some of those lessons are about processes within the Department of Defense. Are there any lessons that you take from this experimentation and feed it into your acquisition programs, into your requirement setting, into just informing industry on what the future challenges are going to be?
Oh, tons. So right now we do a lot with mission applications that are not programs of record. And you can imagine, right? All of the combatant commands have looked at how they can get the best decision capability. I come from a service, and I know that funding combatant command. Go Navy. And I was this is like back to haunt me, right? I was the resource sponsor for joint capabilities. I made decisions that did not invest in joint capabilities and picked service equities over joint. So I'm guilty of this behavior. I know it exists. And it's really hard, right? Because inside the services, you have all these objectives, and when it comes to joint, it's like, well, maybe somebody else will take care of it, or maybe it's not that important. It's also, I think, there are a limited number of people that have actually had exposure at the joint and combatant command level in a lot of cases. And so to take that back and be able to advocate for that is sometimes harder. But what we are really trying to do is to understand if they've gone out and they've brought in a certain capability, how do we look to sustain that? Because if they're going to rely on it, now that doesn't necessarily mean CDAO, acquires and procures and sustains it. But how do we think through that with acquisition and sustainment at OSD? What's the acquisition strategy and approach to making that happen? We did ask Congress for a good chunk of money, a little over $200 million in the budget in 2024 for JADC2, which includes this data integration layer, the experimentation, and mission applications, so that we can say, hey, the combatant commands are already using certain applications today. Let's actually give them the sustainability and reliability behind those until the department determines its scaled strategy, and let's be a part of shaping what that will look like.
Good.
Yeah.
That's, it sounds like you have a pathway forward. I'd like to turn from these big picture acquisition questions to something more specific, which is how you work with small and innovative businesses. I know you have a new tool called the TradeWinds Marketplace. Can you talk about how you're helping small and innovative companies compete to win contracts? And if they do win, can you help them, how you help them address questions like paying for cybersecurity or producing at scale? Because it's one thing to win a contract and another thing for a small business to grow into the role.
Yeah. So in TradeWind, the way the marketplace works, if you're a company, you can put together a 5-minute or less video about your capability. It'll be screened by a panel and then put on the marketplace, really for anybody to write a contract. So it's not just CDAO specific, but it's across the department. And this is really great because a lot of times, one, for government to find small innovative companies and what they offer is really hard. So we've created both a marketplace for government to come in, and when people reach out to us and say, hey, I've got this challenge, I need an analytic or AI capability, do you know anyone? We can say, yeah, on the marketplace, we have these kind of companies that you might want to talk to. And then all they have to do is go talk to the company, and it's already been pre-screened. And so technically it's been competed, it's been through the process, and they can go immediately into any kind of relationship that they want with that company on a different kind of contract. We also have a vehicle called Try AI, which is a blanket purchase agreement, which allows companies to come in and show their AI capability with government partners. It's cost-free, which is like a contract with no money, but it protects all the IP and it allows government to actually bring the data and test out the capability, and then if it goes well in the test, then you can do a follow-on contract. So it really reduces that level of risk for both the government and the company. Once they win the contract, I'm a little less familiar on the cybersecurity side, although I sit in a ton of meetings where our CIO partners are actively thinking through reducing the barrier for cybersecurity. And the Deputy Secretary has specifically focused on the innovation ecosystem inside the department and the barriers around like security facility classification and the time that it takes us to work out certain aspects of the process. And those offices inside of DoD, we meet at least monthly on all the different barriers, and so there really is this kind of institutional focus on removing those. Okay,
that's good to hear, because a little bit on the more negative side, when I talk to industry folks at every level, larger and smaller ones, sometimes I hear feedback like, if any of these innovation organizations worked, the department wouldn't need so many of them. We don't have transparency on who wins or lose. We don't know who is going to be successful. We don't see smaller companies transitioning from small, innovative solutions to actually bigger programs of records. So what's your take on these challenges, and how are you working to push the department along and take the next step?
Yeah, no, absolutely. We're a huge beneficiary of solving these problems. Inside of CDAO, as we start to build other capabilities, for Guide 5, we worked with this one partner, and the ATO process to get them cleared into a specific network was incredibly long. We almost missed the exercise because we couldn't get the ATO process to work. Now, we actually hired our own authorizing official inside of CDAO, who is a trailblazer inside of DoD when it comes to how to do cybersecurity and ATOs, specifically on the software and data side. And so we're hoping that we've put a lot of weight on his shoulders. Danny Holtzman is his name, and he's absolutely super creative around how to think through these processes. We're hoping that we can use these processes that he has proven in other programs in the past in DoD and bring them both to our solution sets, but then also create playbooks and look at, how can we lead with the discussion around reciprocity and around, what it really takes to put security in place. So leading by example is one, and then just being a vocal proponent inside the department at all of our governance meetings around how important it is to get it solved. Although I think leadership from the Deputy Secretary puts a lot of pressure on them to begin with.
Yeah, it's important. Because that's where some innovation comes from.
Yeah.
So,
but I will take your feedback back to our acquisition team too to think through.
Okay. Happy to have further conversations on that.
Yeah.
So just in the interest of time, I'm going to ask one more question, and then we can open it up to the audience, both online and in the room, for further questions. And that comes to really one of the biggest and most important challenges for any organization, which is talent management. And really in this area, I see two big challenges. First of all, DoD is competing with large defense contractors, the traditional big five, large tech companies like Microsoft, Amazon Web Services, and Google, emerging players like Palantir, most of whom could probably afford to pay a little bit more than DoD. So how do you compete for and maintain talent in such a competitive marketplace? And also, how do you train and maintain the skills inside the department, since these fields are moving so rapidly?
Yeah, absolutely. These are great questions. So on the first one, how do we compete for talent? We actively compete. So first of all, we start off with the idea that the traditional government path of a 20 or 30-year career is not really what we're looking for inside of CDAO or inside the digital workforce in the department in general. Because this field changes so quickly, because it really benefits from a combination of both government and industry experience inside the government, we want rotation in and out. Our director, Craig Martell, came from Silicon Valley. Yep. He's like 18 months is like the average tenure of someone out in Silicon Valley, which to government is like, man, you'll be lucky if you have your email address in like 6 months and like a computer, and which we're working on making that better. But really thinking through, we want this pipeline where industry can come in and government can go out, and we can have that refresh of experience. And actually, there's a significant portion of our team that brings that, and we really, really value their insights, and we exchange anecdotes all the time about how to leverage that experience. So that's one. And then on the competition side, we have an incredible mission. In fact, at our offsite that we did this week with all of our CDAO team, one of the big questions was around, they called it like bugs and features. And so we talked through what are the bugs of the organization, how can we improve communication and things like that, but the features were all around the mission, that people are incredibly dedicated to what we're trying to do, both in terms of improving the department and how we work, and then of course delivering capability to the warfighter. And our challenges are really, really hard. JADC2 is a completely different data challenge than anything you're going to find in industry, especially when you start to talk about data, the tactical edge, and all the warfighting concepts that come into that. It's something I personally get excited about. It's something we see people come in all the time. And so we think that with this combination of it's not a career goal, it's not a goal to become a career civilian, and we're going to give you some really hard problems to make an impact on that are going to last. We feel comfortable that we can attract the right people. Second part is, once they're in, how do you manage them? How do you maintain them? How do you train them? CDAO just became the functional community manager for the digital workforce inside of DoD. So under the cyber workforce framework, there are about 12 data analytic and AI roles. Arnie runs the software community for that community management piece. So we're really focused on the data and analytic folks, as well as product managers that we talked about. And we are going through right now identifying where those billets exist. It's somewhere less than 280,000. We've identified that. But exactly which ones and where they are. And then we're thinking through things like, what does community management look like from a mentorship or from a networking perspective? How do we share best practices across the community? How do we code the positions so we know what skills they actually need? And then I think once we define the work roles and the skill sets, there will be a lot of cross-community blending. You know, we have lots of financial managers in our organization that are not working on our budget. They're building analytics over on that side. And so once we identify those, we'll be able to better inform our training plan. One last thing, I know this is a long answer, but we do run training programs for the department on data and AI at the executive level and at other levels, and are looking to expand that out both virtually and in person in the coming months and years. Yeah.
I'm glad to hear there's efforts inside of the department to train workforce on how to think about these skills. So with that, I could ask a lot more questions, and in fact, one of the things I did to prepare for this was to ask ChatGPT what questions I should ask you, and they came up with 18 good questions, which I'll keep in the backup. But let's start with folks in the room, if you don't mind just saying your name and then asking where you're from and asking your question. We have two interns here with mics, so any questions in the room? I have a couple on the online already.
Hi, good morning. Thanks for being here. My name is John Raviv. I'm with Capital One. And in this talk, so appreciate you hosting this. I'll take this out of my pockets. It look crazy. Talked about digesting data, analyzing data, making the connections, training. So there's a lot of different pieces here. All those pieces require some level of expertise, either internal or external. How do you think about what sorts of activities CDAO or DoD wants to do themselves and own themselves, and what sort of things you're going to be going to industry in order to accomplish, and whether these efforts, in your mind, represent almost a, shall I say, net positive for external opportunities, or maybe a net negative as you consolidate some previously stovepipe activities and actually desire to do more internally. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, we want industry to develop capability for the department, especially when it comes to, analytics and warfighting capability. It is important for our government workforce to be really savvy about data analytics and AI. And we want citizen data scientists across the department who are going to bring that understanding and ability to create products to their decision makers internally. My military assistant just went off to command in the Marines, and he is an operations resource analyst and an infantryman and a data scientist at the same time, which was pretty amazing. But he's like, here are the tools that I want delivered to me by the time I get to command. And I was like, okay, well, that's great. All of our tools inside of Advanta are commercial tools. And so while we have put them together from a government perspective in terms of an offering, they're all provided by industry. And so I think we want that balance of savviness inside the department, but our problems are going to get to a point of scale and complexity that industry is going to be the place where, one, they're going to be able to move faster, they're going to have new creative tool sets, and they're going to be able to sustain it and work with the customer over time. So I do see a net gain. And one of the big things that we talk about inside of CDAO all the time is, when we inherited these organizations, they had done use cases and they had kind of started down the path. But really our challenge in CDAO is scale. And so if we're going to deliver or develop something, or create a plan for something, we envision, what does it look like if we had 100 companies ready to go to develop on this? What would that look like? And how would we approach it? And we actually think there's a lot of untapped potential inside the industry base because we haven't freed up our data and we haven't found a way to connect users to problem sets more efficiently in our processes. We've done it in pockets, but not at scale. And so I think that's one of our big goals.
Thank you. I think I'll switch back and forth between the room and online questions. We have one from Breaking Defense. Can you talk about some of the efforts outlined in the upcoming artificial intelligence adoption strategy?
Yeah, so it is upcoming, and but what we were trying to do there was really give some left and right guidance to the department for how to think about how to develop data analytics and AI. And we had the previous AI strategy from the JAIC, which actually did a really good job at outlining near, mid, and long-term goals. Many of which the department hit, some of which we didn't. And as we built the new strategy, we asked ourselves why. And so a lot of that had to do with, were we really thinking through agile processes, and were we paying attention to that? So while you'll see a data and AI adoption strategy, it'll talk a lot about, how we have to approach this in an iterative and agile way. And then it'll not have necessarily like specific milestones. A lot of strategies have like task 1.1, 1.2. It's not going to be one of those strategies. It's going to be something where organizations can nest inside of it and start to put their plans inside. Yeah.
Okay, great. Another question in the room?
Yeah, Peter Guy, professor. Thank you. Peter Guy, professor of international management. Okay. Minnesota State University, I teach international management, and you made a number of references to overcoming obstacles in the context of culture and leadership. And I'm thinking particularly of international relations, and we've got lots of issues, interesting issues relating to how to deal with partners out there. And of course, our partners are hugely important. So what have you learned? What are your takeaways from dealing with big data and AI that might help us formulate new innovative strategies for dealing with international partners, first and foremost, our allies?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a couple things. We run a 16-nation group, cuts across Five Eyes, NATO, and then some other partners across the globe. So 16 different nations, called the AI Partnership for Defense. And a couple times a year, we get together and just share what everyone's doing in the data AI and analytics space. From a best practices standpoint, and we pick different themes. Sometimes it's on talent, sometimes it's on data quality, sometimes it's on AI test and evaluation or responsible AI development. And just that dialogue is hugely helpful. They're actually really into different kinds of music. The nation that hosts gets to pick the intermission music, which is really fun. And so it creates bonds across nations so that you can hear, oh, they're doing that. That's really interesting. I want to follow up. And two, you get to just see where people are on their journey and where you might be able to either help or learn. And I think that kind of cross dialogue is great, and it builds those relationships that you can leverage in the future. In Ukraine, in particular, with security force assistance, we've learned an incredible lesson around just who shows up in a crisis or in a conflict, and you can't always predict. And in this case, we didn't predict how many people were going to come to the table with offers of assistance. One of the things our Defense Digital Service team did early on in the crisis was create an application that was able to match donors with needs. It was basically spreadsheets and calls and slips of paper, and they came in and they said, hey, we can digitize this. And to this day, that software is helping to better coordinate donations across different partners. But to do that, we had to find an environment to host it on. And so we've now looked internally at what are our capabilities for just come as you are partnerships and data exchange. We've built one for this specific use case, but what does that look like at scale? And how do we ensure the security and the access in our technological tool set? A lot of times we design around our closest partners, but we don't think that others are going to come and be equally helpful.
I'm inspired to hear that you're working on Ukraine and trying to help that effort.
Yeah, our people are incredible. Many deployed to UCOM for the crisis and continue to support to this day. It's a thing we're really proud of.
Thank you. I'm going to turn next to another online question. This one is from AWS, Amazon Web Services. You mentioned recently that CDAO is looking at and experimenting with large language models for particular use cases. Can you elaborate on the current status of this initiative, early observations, challenges encountered, and what you would like to see next?
Yeah, we know that large language models represent a huge opportunity for the department. We also recognize that AI is really use case driven. And so even though we have generative AI and you can ask it just about any question and it will give you the answer, when it really comes to providing a capability, it has to work for the specific use case it's applied to. We have different kinds of AI across the department. So computer vision, neural nets, right? Predictive analytics what you use in the maintenance field. Each one of those is developed and trained, and the people are trained on how to use them, and they're applied in a specific use case, and we evaluate their effectiveness. We always understand the effectiveness of our capabilities when we deploy them, and AI is no different, and large language models are no different. So the experimentation that we're doing is really to understand how do we evaluate large language models, what metrics are we going to use, and how do we understand what use cases they're really good for and which ones we may not want to use them for. The problems of hallucination inside of large language models are huge for the department. We really need to understand the implications of that, and experimentation is a great way for us to dive in and to be able to provide more specific signals instead of just go fix it. Here are the things that we need out of these models, and here's what we want you to fix, industry, as you start to sell these capabilities to DoD, or to send out the demand signal for, hey, run wild over here, this looks great, let's move more cautiously over here for other use cases.
Thank you.
Yeah.
What do you mean by hallucinations?
The making up of information that may not necessarily
So
be
what
true.
we've seen in the news
Yes.
about that. Okay, because when I asked ChatGPT what I should ask you, those questions are pretty good.
The questions are good. Yeah, it makes me wonder what we're putting out about CDAO in the press. But yeah.
So I guess one of their questions was, what are some of the recent trends and advances in data and analytics that you're monitoring and hoping to adopt?
Yeah, I mean, definitely monitoring LLMs. We have passionate debates about LLMs inside of DoD, inside of CDAO, and how to move out as a department there in a way that is responsible, but also takes advantage of the opportunity. Every capability, I think I said this, but I just want to reemphasize this. Every capability DoD employs, and this gets to the responsibility of AI, we know what it's going to do, we know what it's not going to do, and the users of that capability have been trained on how to use it effectively for its purpose. And where not to use it, because they know it's not going to be effective. Because AI seems to, you can't hold it. If you're a user, you're not really holding it, right? It's not like a system. It's not, but it has equal impact. And so we have to think about that, just like every other capability we deploy as a department. So we're looking at LLMs. We're also continuing to look at AI in general. I mean, there are LLMs have got the news lately, but there's still much more work that we can do with traditional forms of AI and how to apply those and get those right. And then I think just working again on the analytics and applying those to our users, I think is the things that we're focused on.
Good answer. I think we have time for one more question in the room.
Hi, I'm Di Cook. I'm a fellow here at ISP, and I had a quick question. It's a little more specific, but it's following up on your point about how TEVV for AI systems is a continuous iterative process, more so than other types of technologies. And to that point, how has CDAO been thinking about what this requirement means for the ongoing relationship with vendors who'd likely be involved in supporting this ongoing maintenance with the services? And what will that be like? What changes will be necessary, if any? And what does this mean for acquisition strategy and approach?
Yeah, good questions. inside of our organization, we have a test and evaluation group we call AI Assurance, or Assess and Assure, and we are thinking about this in a couple ways. The first is through this concept of AI ML scaffolding. So we don't expect CDAO to build all the AI in the department. We also don't expect CDAO to test and evaluate all the AI in the department. But we are building tools for test and evaluation and thinking through what are the requirements for others that are fielding AI to do in the context of T&E. And so this may come in a couple of forms. It may be that if you're developing an AI capability, you come to CDAO and we have kind of a joint AI test center, JDIC, and you bring your AI in and you use the tools and you test it and you get what you need. It may also be that you're working with an industry partner that already has the ability to test and evaluate, and we want to make sure that we've got those criteria that let us know, the justified confidence that that system's going to do what it says it's going to do, not going to do what it's not going to do what it's not supposed to do, and that we can provide that insight to our operators. And so it may be something that we put in acquisition guidance. It may be something that we offer as a service, probably some combination of the two. And one of the things that our organization is thinking through right now is exactly how to put those pieces together and provide that. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, I think we're running out of town, but I'd like to have a round of applause. Everybody online, clap. Margie, thank you. This was terrific, really informative, and would love to invite you back because
Absolutely.
this is such a rapidly moving field that we'll have all new things to think about in another 6 months.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
All right, take care.